In a quiet corner of a world painted with moss and sunbeams, there lived a little knight. He was not known for daring deeds or for vanquishing fearsome beasts. In fact, he was known for something else entirely. He was known for his shield. It was a perfect circle of silver, so polished and so bright that you could see the whole sky in it. The little knight spent his mornings, afternoons, and the moments before dusk rubbing it with a soft cloth, chasing away every speck of dust, every smudge of earth, every hint of a shadow. He worked until the shield was a mirror, a flawless, gleaming disk of light. But this was his secret. The brighter the shield shone, the more it helped him hide. It wasn't protecting him from dragons or trolls, for there were none in his peaceful glen. It was protecting him from the fluttering in his own stomach, the whisper of doubt in his ears, and the way his knees sometimes felt like wobbly pudding. The little knight was afraid. He was afraid of the dark, of strange noises, of being alone, and most of all of not being brave enough. He believed that if his shield was perfect, no one would ever see the fearful knight hiding behind it. The brilliant shine, he hoped, would blind them to the tremble in his hands. This was the setup of his days, a cycle of polish and pretend, a quiet performance of courage. One crisp autumn afternoon, as the wind carried the scent of wood smoke and damp earth, a story tumbled through the air. It wasn't a story from a book, but from the forest itself. The whispering woods which bordered the knight's glen had a magic of its own. Its leaves didn't just rustle, they held tales. They were storytelling leaves, and on that day, they all whispered of the Sunstone of Inner Light. The legend said that deep within the heart of the woods, resting in a sun-dappled clearing, was a stone that glowed with pure courage. Whoever found it would be filled with a bravery so bright and so warm that fear could never find a shadow to hide in again. The little knight listened, his polishing cloth held still in his hand. A stone of courage. A light from within. The idea took root in his mind. Perhaps this was the answer. If he had the sunstone, he wouldn't need his perfect shield anymore. He wouldn't have to pretend. He could be truly, genuinely brave. A new feeling stronger than his fear began to bubble up inside him. A tiny spark of hope. He looked at his reflection in the shield. The knight staring back looked small and uncertain. But the idea of the sunstone made his reflection seem, for just a moment, a little bit taller. The quest was decided in that silent moment. He would venture into the whispering woods. He would find the Sunstone of Inner Light and claim its courage for his own. He strapped the shimmering shield to his arm, its weight both a comfort and a burden, and took his first hesitant step towards the treeline, where the real adventure was waiting. The entrance to the whispering woods was like a doorway to another world. The light softened, turning a gentle shade of green as it filtered through the thick canopy of leaves overhead. The air grew still and quiet, save for the soft, papery rustle that gave the woods its name. The whispers began almost immediately. They weren't scary, not at first. They were the stories of heroes past, of brave adventurers and wise kings. The little knight walked on, the tales of courage filling his ears, making him feel a little braver himself. His shield, however, was a problem. It caught the slivers of sunlight that pierced the canopy and flashed them across the tree trunks, startling sleeping squirrels and sending shy deer bounding away. The woods seemed to want quiet and shadow, and his shield was a beacon of startling light. His first real challenge was not a monster but a stream. It was called the Babbling Brook, but it didn't just babble. It chattered and gossiped. As the little knight approached, the water swirled and formed little eddies that looked like laughing faces. The brook saw his reflection in the perfect shield and seemed to mock it. The gurgling sounds felt like teasing whispers, reflecting his own insecurities back at him. It chuckled at the perfect, unblemished surface, and he imagined it was laughing at the frightened boy hiding behind it. He stood at the edge, his boots sinking into the soft mud. To cross, he would have to step on the slippery, moss-covered stones. What if he fell? What if the beautiful shield was muddied or even worse, scratched? The thought sent a jolt of panic through him. For a long moment, he was frozen. He held the shield up, trying to angle it so the brook couldn't see its own reflection, as if that would stop its teasing. But he had to cross. The sunstone was on the other side. Taking a deep breath, He ignored the chattering water and focused on the first stone. He took a small step, his foot landing unsteadily. He wobbled, his arms flailing for a moment. His shield, heavy and awkward, threw him off balance. With a clumsy lurch, he dropped to one knee on the stone, his shield arm plunging into the cold, clear water. He scrambled up, his heart pounding. When he pulled his arm out, a long, ugly smear of mud and wet moss was smeared across the shield's perfect face. A gasp escaped his lips. It was ruined. The mirror was broken. The chattering of the brook seemed to grow louder, a chorus of laughter at his failure. He felt a tear prick his eye. But then he looked across the stream. He was halfway there. He had stumbled, yes, but he hadn't fallen completely. He had gotten his shield dirty, but he was safe. A new thought, small and quiet, pushed through his panic. Maybe a little mud wasn't the end of the world. He took another step, and then another, his focus no longer on keeping the shield clean, but simply on reaching the other side. When he finally stepped onto the far bank, his shield was dirty and his boots were soaked, but he was across. He had faced the laughing reflection and won. Deeper in the woods, the whispers of the leaves began to change. They no longer told stories of grand heroes. Instead, they began to whisper doubts. Are you sure you're on the right path? A true knight wouldn't have stumbled. Your shield is dirty. What kind of knight are you? The voices sounded like his own deepest fears, given voice by the forest. The path ahead of him split, twisting into a maze of tangled roots and shadowy thorns. It was the labyrinth of whispers, a place known to confuse and dishearten even the bravest travelers. Each path looked identical, and with every step, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. The little knight clutched his shield, its familiar weight a small comfort, even with the smudge of mud on it. He tried to polish it away with his sleeve, but it only smeared the dirt further. The whispers intensified. You're lost. You'll never find the stone. You should just go back. His resolve began to crumble. He felt that old, familiar wobble in his knees. He wanted to turn and run, to go back to his quiet glen where the only sound was the swish of his polishing cloth. He stopped, completely overwhelmed, and leaned against a large, ancient oak tree. He closed his eyes, trying to block out the sounds. This is a good place to ask a question. What do you do when you feel lost and don't know which way to go? The little knight didn't have a map. He didn't have a guide. All he had was his dirty shield and the pounding of his own heart. He opened his eyes and looked at the maze of paths before him. Panicking wouldn't help. He had to think. He remembered how he had crossed the stream, not by trying to be perfect but just by focusing on the next step. He took a deep breath. He couldn't silence the whispers, but maybe he didn't have to listen to them. He looked down at his feet. He could take one step. He chose a path not because it looked more promising but just because it was a choice. He started walking. He ignored the whispers of doubt and instead started to listen to other sounds, the chirp of a cricket, the tap-tap-tapping of a woodpecker somewhere far off. He focused on the feeling of the earth beneath his boots. And slowly, magically, as he focused on the world outside of his own head, the whispers began to fade. They were still there, but they were no longer the only thing he could hear. The path began to untangle. He realized the maze wasn't about finding the right way, but about choosing a way and walking forward with purpose. As he continued, he came upon his next trial. Blocking the path was a great fallen log, covered in thick, prickly moss. It was too high to climb over easily, especially with his heavy shield. He could try to go around, but the undergrowth on either side was dense and thorny. He stood there, contemplating his options when he noticed something. Perched on a branch just above the log was a large, silent owl. It wasn't whispering or hooting. Seemed to be waiting. The little knight looked from the owl to the log. He thought about pushing it, but it was far too heavy. He thought about climbing it, but he was afraid of slipping on the moss and scratching his armor or worse, his shield again. He held his shield up as if to show the owl. See? I am a knight. I should be able to get past this. The owl simply blinked, its gaze unwavering. Then did something peculiar. It lifted one of its wings and gently brushed it against the side of the log, not with force, but with a light sweeping motion. It revealed, for a moment, that the log wasn't a solid barrier. It was hollow. There was a dark, tunnel-like opening at its base, just big enough for a little knight to crawl through. The opening was dark. It was cramped. His fear of the dark surged inside him. It would be so easy to get stuck. What if there were spiders inside? His first instinct was to back away. But the owl just watched, its silence seeming to hold a question. The knight looked at his shield. It was no help here. In fact, its size and shine were a hindrance. It was too big to carry through the tunnel easily. He would have to take it off. The thought was terrifying. The shield was his protection, his identity. To leave it behind, even for a moment, felt like leaving a part of himself behind. He hesitated, his hand trembling as he reached for the straps on his arm. Here's another question for you. Have you ever had to do something that felt scary, but you knew it was the right thing to do? He looked at the dark tunnel, then back at the patient owl. He had to go through. It was the only way forward. With a deep, shaky breath, he unstrapped his shield and carefully set it down on a patch of soft grass. For a moment he felt utterly exposed, smaller than he had ever felt before. But he also felt lighter. He got down on his hands and knees, peeked into the darkness, and began to crawl. The inside of the log smelled of damp earth and old wood. It was dark, but not completely. A tiny sliver of light shone from the other end. He focused on that pinprick of light, crawling towards it, his heart still thumping but his limbs moving with a steady purpose. When he emerged on the other side, blinking in the filtered sunlight, he was covered in dirt and bits of bark. He turned and saw the owl give a single, slow nod before it silently flew off into the canopy. The knight went back, picked up his shield, strapped it back on, and continued his journey, the weight on his arm feeling different now. Less like a wall to hide behind, and more like a tool he had chosen to carry. The journey had marked him, and it had marked his shield, but he was still moving forward. The forest began to change again. The trees grew taller and farther apart, allowing more and more sunlight to stream down to the forest floor. The air felt warmer, filled with the hum of happy bees. The little knight felt a sense of anticipation building within him. He felt he was getting close. The path opened up into a wide circular clearing. In the very center, a single flat-topped boulder sat, bathed in the brightest, warmest sunbeam he had ever seen. This had to be it. The home of the Sunstone of Inner Light. He approached the boulder with a reverent slowness, his heart thumping with a mix of excitement and nervousness. He had made it. Through the chattering brook, the whispering maze, and the dark tunnel. He stepped up to the great stone and peered at its surface. He was expecting to see a gem, a crystal, something glowing with an otherworldly power. But there was nothing. The top of the boulder was bare, warmed by the sun, but empty. There was no stone. A wave of disappointment washed over him, so powerful it made him sit down hard on the soft grass. It was all for nothing. The stories weren't true. He had come all this way, faced all those fears for an empty rock. He felt foolish. His shoulders slumped. Without thinking, he rested his shield on his lap, its surface facing up towards the sky. And then he saw it. The sunbeam that lit the clearing struck the face of his shield. But it didn't create a blinding, perfect reflection like it used to. The surface was no longer a flawless mirror. It was now a map of his journey. There was the long, muddy smear from the babbling brook. There were several small scratches from the thorny branches of the labyrinth of whispers. There was a dusting of brown earth and bark from the hollow log. It was imperfect. It was marked. It was beautiful. And from the center of this imperfect, journey-worn shield, the sunlight collected and reflected a light that was different. It wasn't a harsh, glaring shine. It was a soft, warm, and gentle glow. It pulsed with a quiet energy, a light that seemed to come not just from the sun above, but from the shield itself. He stared into that warm glow, and in its heart he saw a reflection. It was his own face. But it wasn't the small, uncertain, fearful face he was used to seeing. The knight looking back at him from the shield had dirt on his cheek, His hair was a mess, but his eyes were clear and calm. He looked tired, yes, but he also looked steady. He looked brave. In that moment, the truth of the Whispering Woods settled over him, a realization as warm and as bright as the light from his shield. There was no magical sunstone. There never was. The storytelling leaves hadn't lied, but he had misunderstood the story. The Sunstone of Inner Light wasn't something you found. It was something you became. The courage wasn't in a rock. It was in the choice to take the first step into the woods. It was in the stumble on a slippery stone and the will to get back up. It was in choosing a path when you were lost. It was in crawling through the dark toward a tiny pinprick of light. He had been looking for a magic cure for his fear, but the journey itself had been the cure. Every challenge he faced, every moment of silent bravery when he chose to move forward despite the wobble in his knees, that was what built his inner light. His shield was no longer a place to hide. It was a testament to his journey. Each scratch and smudge was a badge of honor, a reminder of a fear he had faced. He didn't need it to be a perfect mirror anymore, because he was no longer afraid of what he might see. The little knight sat there for a long time, basking in the warm glow from his shield and the even warmer glow inside his own chest. The feeling wasn't a loud roar of triumph. It was a quiet, solid certainty. Self-confidence. It wasn't the absence of fear. He knew he would feel scared again. It was the knowledge that he could feel scared and still take the next step. Courage wasn't a destination. It was the path itself. When he finally stood up to leave the clearing, he walked differently. His steps were lighter, more certain. He carried his shield not to hide, but as a companion, a reminder of the strength he had discovered within himself. As he walked back through the Whispering Woods, the leaves rustled around him. But this time, he didn't hear doubts or taunts. He heard a new story. A quiet, gentle story about a little knight who went looking for courage, and found it in the most unexpected place of all, reflected in the beautiful, imperfect surface of his own shield. He returned to his glen not with a magical stone, but with something far more precious. He returned with the quiet, steady confidence of knowing who he truly was. And he never felt the need to polish his shield to a perfect mirror ever again. And what about you? Our little knight learned about the light inside himself. Perhaps our next adventure will be about learning the colors of our feelings. What do you think? 4. Educational core. This story teaches that self-confidence is not about being perfect or fearless, but is built through the experience of facing challenges and moving forward despite being scared. 5. Moral core. True courage is not found in grand gestures, but in the quiet, personal moments of choosing to face your fears. Moral core. True courage is not found in grand gestures, but in the quiet, personal moments of choosing to face your fears.